Welcome to the Thursday Breathe in the Book meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Kelly, and I am an alcoholic. This is our book, okay? And when I first came into a meeting, somebody handed me one of these, and I was like, well, that's awfully big. I'm not going to read that. I'll listen to what other people have to say, and then I'll just repeat what they say until I walk through the book with a sponsor. Very important to have a sponsor. Does everybody have a big book? It's also a good idea to have a big book in a big book meeting. Got one? There's some up here for anybody to borrow, okay? So, the way the book is separated, okay? It's not that big, but the second half are stories, and yours is smaller than mine, this one here, because it's just the first 164 that's right there, okay? The 164 pages outlines our program, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the second half are the stories. Now, there's been 4 different editions of the big book. In each of the editions, we've changed the stories. We've taken out some stories and put in some stories. But the first part that outlines our program does not change, okay? What we're going to do in this meeting is we're going to go over the first 164 pages of the big book. Now, the other thing in big book meetings that's happened is that I would go to big book meetings and somebody would read and somebody else would read a little differently, and I'd be distracted by the second paragraph and I'd be looking around. So I wanted to do a big book study where we overview the whole 164, and that's what we do. So in the very beginning of the big book, there's a page called the contents page, and that's up here on the whiteboard, okay? That outlines what's in the 164 pages. So what we'll do is we're going to review the 164 pages so you know exactly why we're reading what we're reading tonight and how it fits in to our program, okay? Other big book meetings, you go around the room and everybody reads a little bit. Sometimes shares about their cat afterwards. I don't know. But in this meeting, there's only one person that reads. That would be me. But during the reading, we encourage crosstalk. So if there's something that you don't understand, or you have a question, or you don't know what that word means, just shout it out. Hold on, I'm confused. Just shout it out. There's a lot of people here with a lot of time, and it's just like we're kind of sitting on the couch doing this thing with each other together, okay? You can shout out, what's Armistice Day? And Jack might go, oh, well, that's Veterans Day, okay? The book was started, the first edition came out in 1939. Our 2 founders are Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, okay? The 2 gentlemen up on the wall. In the preface, the very beginning of the book, in 1939, when we decided to put this book out, it starts off by saying that we don't change the 164 pages. There's a strong sentiment against it. And we hope when you read this, or some of the stories in the back, that you might go, I've felt like that. I think this might work for me. That, me too, right? Right after that, in the forewords, there's forewords for 4 different editions, because we've had 4 different editions of the big book. The first edition, it says, the main purpose of this book is to show you precisely how we have recovered. It's our basic text, right? In the foreword to the second edition, we throw in some history. It talks about how Bill and Bob met, Dr. Bob met, and how Bill Wilson met, how we've grown, okay? And then in the foreword to the third edition, the foreword to the fourth edition, it talks about how we're in more countries and we've done a lot more things, okay? The doctor's opinion starts the big book, or the 164, even though it's not chapter 1. This is not Dr. Bob, our second founder. This is Dr. Silkworth, the man that helped detox and help 40 to 50,000 different alcoholics, okay? Dr. Silkworth wrote the doctor's opinion. Pretty much we walked up to him and we were like, could you write an intro to our book? And it's like if we went down to Harbor General and talked to the doctor that kept seeing us go in there to the ER, and he'd be like, oh, you again. Sorry, we don't have a pill that'll fix you. You have this allergy to alcohol that no doctor has any pill that can fix. You're irritable, restless, and discontent. And no frothy emotional appeal by family members or us doctors has been able to get you to stop. You basically need a spiritual slap on the head. But whatever these men have to say in the rest of this book seems to help. So that's the good doctor's opinion. He talks about the allergy. In there we might find those A, B, and C's. That, I'm an alcoholic. Oh my. I haven't been able to stop by myself. Something bigger than me is going to have to work, right? Right after that, chapter 1 is Bill Wilson's story. Just like in a speaker meeting, Bill tells a story. He talks about crossing that line, trying one more time to get sober, one more time, self-knowledge, stealing from his family, depression, crossing that line, being shaky when he walks across the street, and finally the message being carried to him and the importance of carrying it to another. In the second chapter, there is a solution. We all chime in and we go, a lot of us were just like Bill. If you think you got what we have, if you think you're a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, don't worry about it. Come along for the ride. You just might be an alcoholic. More about alcoholism. We usually read it in a meeting. It starts off with, nobody wants to admit that he's bodily and mentally different than his fellows, right? So it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove that we could just drink like normal people. And then, just like in a participation meeting, there's a couple different stories that you might relate to, okay? We agnostics, we've mentioned spirituality a lot up until chapter 4. So in chapter 4, we basically talk about don't overthink the God thing, okay? You lack that power. Lack of power is my dilemma. I can't seem to get sober on my own, right? I lack that power. So there's got to be a power that I'm lacking, a power bigger than me that's going to be able to help me become sane again, right? Come along for the ride. If you feel like you can drink, you start drinking, you can't stop, you just might be one of us, and you may lack that power. And how it works, we read it in a meeting, and it starts off, and we go through all the steps. We beg of you to be fearless, just hang tight. If you're feeling like you need this, just come on, grab one of our hands and do this thing. We go over the 12 steps, and then we say, up until now, what you've read so far, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, our personal adventures and more about alcoholism and Bill's story, have made clear, if they have, 3 pertinent ideas to you that, I'm an alcoholic. No human power. I seem to have lacked that power. No human power is going to be able to relieve me of my alcoholism, but something bigger than me is going to have to work, right? The A, B, and C are the pertinent ideas of steps 1 and 2, and we find them by reading up until chapter 5. And it says, being convinced of these, now you're at step 3. So the rest of chapter 5 talks about step 3. But first we got to understand self-will run riot, and we're always trying to run the show, and if this would just go my way, and if the people could just see and getting away with what we want to get away with, and self-pity, selfishness, fear, and all these things that we deal with, and how to do a 3rd step prayer. What you got for me, God? Just put in front of me what you want so I can get through this and help another. And how am I going to do that? By some action, some work, and that starts with the 4th step, which is also in chapter 5. And the 4th step is going to be where we're going to go over those resentments, our fears, our sexual inventory, how we talk with people intimately and how we interact, right? And we're learning a few good facts about ourselves. So in chapter 6, into action, we learn how to read that to another human being, most likely our sponsor. We learn about some character defects that we've learned in that inventory and how to clear it up, how to be useful to another, and how to start cleaning up the wreckage of our past in 8 and 9. And then the rest of chapter 6 talks about 10 and 11, how we stay spiritually fit, how we treat others, and how we keep ourselves so we don't get caught up in resentments, fear, insecurities, and harming others, right? So, after we get done with those, we're now at step 11. There's a whole chapter dedicated to working with others, and that's how we introduce ourselves to the new person. We don't judge them. We don't talk down from any moral or spiritual hilltop. We ask them if they need a book, and then we let them know, if we've already done these steps, I've had the experience of going through these steps, I can help you go through them when you get to your 3rd and your 5th step where you need somebody. Okay? Right now we're into the whys. So up until this point, we've come out of that darkness, that fear, that insecurity, that, oh my God, one more time, I've done it again, and we've done some work on ourselves, and we're starting to carry a message to another, and we're starting to feel the freedom, the promises, a new freedom, a new happiness, and we know how to help share it with somebody else. This book was written, it wasn't just written to us in 1939. It wasn't like we knew where all the alcoholics were. But we wanted to put out a book, so it also went out so if a wife or a family member picked it up, or an employer. So these 3 chapters deal a lot with us after we've either gotten sober or our journey to get sober, what the family goes through, okay? A vision for you, Bill sums it all up like he does in most of the chapters in all of his writings. And think about it, we read a vision for you at the end of a meeting and it says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. We had like 2 years sober, 3 years, or less when we put this book together. And we put a book together that would change lives for 80 plus years. Pretty amazing. But we're pretty much going, here's our book, don't die, right? The first story in all the stories is Dr. Bob, our second founder, okay? And we'll be reading that one as well. Any questions? No! I love it. What a lively group. All right. So, To the Wives starts off on page 104. Now, this book was written, I'm going to go over, we stopped somewhere in the middle, but I'm going to kind of review what we read last week about To the Wives and some of the points, okay? One of the things is that the first paragraph says that since we've been talking about the alcoholic this whole time, you might want to hear from some of the wives of the men that got sober. Bill didn't ask his wife to write it, though. He originally asked Dr. Bob's wife to write it, and then Bill wrote it himself. So some of the wording, you can tell, was written by one of us. Like, don't pick on them too much just because they're alcoholic. But it was written in 1939, where I'm at the bottom of page 104, where the little italicized explains that it was written in 1939 when there were few women in AA. This chapter assumes that the alcoholic in the family home is likely to be the husband. But many of the suggestions given here may be adapted to help the person who lives with a woman alcoholic, whether she is still drinking or is recovering in AA. Further sources may be noted on page 121. So this is before Al-Anon came about. Has everybody heard of Al-Anon? Does anybody have a question as to what Al-Anon is?
What's Al-Anon?
Oh my. But Al-Anon is where, let's say, the husband of the alcoholic, the wife of the alcoholic, the friend of the alcoholic, the person dealing with the alcoholic, who may not be alcoholic, can go and have their own recovery, started by Bill Wilson's wife. Okay? So, this was prior to that, this chapter. We talk about what some of the family and friends go through. I'm going over to 105 where it says our loyalty and the desire to our alcoholic to hold up their heads and be like others has begotten us in all kinds of predicaments. I'm filling in my own words right now. It's not word for word. We've been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We've told lies to protect our pride and our alcoholic person's reputation. We've prayed. We've begged. We've been patient. We've struck out viciously. We've run away. We've been hysterical. We've been terror-stricken. We've sought sympathy, and we've retaliated with love affairs. So it kind of goes over the battlegrounds that the person dealing with us, the alcoholic, is dealing with, right? And then it says, don't condemn the alcoholic, but you may have an alcoholic that falls into one of 4 different categories. First, he might be a heavy drinker. He doesn't see any problem with it, kind of gets in the way of things, but I got this, right? Or number 2, he's showing a lack of control. He's unable to stay sober, even when he wants to. He might get totally out of hand when he drinks. He might be aware that it could be problematic, but he kind of wants to stop, but he's not really ready to. Alcoholic number 4 or 3 has gone much further than the first 2. He's maybe gotten a little bit more trouble, lost a few jobs. He's kind of gone into the hospital a couple of times. He clings to the notion that he'll yet figure a way to do this without having to get sober and stop drinking, right? Or number 4 might be the one that you're in complete despair about. These are the ones, like me, show up at the hospital, my heart would stop, spitting up blood, yellow eyes, gray skin, but I got this, right? And then it goes on to say, do not despair. If you've got any one of these, even the last one, we've seen each and every one of them recover. Now, we've also talked about last week that there's a point where some of these directions, and we point out the directions in here, can be attributed to when we're working with an alcoholic, when we're a sponsor, right? Not just when we're dealing with a family member, okay? The first principle of success is you should never be angry. Patience and good temper are most necessary. You should never tell him what he should do about his drinking. Do not set your heart on reforming the alcoholic. Reasonableness and patience. Be sure not to be critical. Put yourself in his place. Ask him to read this book. If this approach doesn't work, it may be best to drop the subject, and after a friendly talk, he might revive the topic himself. And I think what we talked about last week is sometimes we'll give a book to somebody that's new, whether they're somebody we love, like a husband or a wife, or just somebody we care about. And we may give them a book and hope upon hope that they want this, and now that they've got the book, they're going to call you tomorrow, and we're going to go to a meeting, they're going to get the... No, they just might not. But we just open ourselves up to where we can be helpful without being critical or trying to reform them or make them get sober, right? You should never crowd him. Avoid urging him to follow the program. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to start reading about page 114. Right in the middle it says, perhaps he won't stop. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband, an alcoholic, you can put in there, who is at large, missing in action. That never happens, does it? I used to think, I was very proud of myself when I was able to come home from work, go to work the next day, and then end up coming back home again, like in the whole 24 hours. Never get lost. It's like, the neighbors weren't as impressed, but I thought it was pretty big. So perhaps you have one that is at large, but should be committed. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men or the alcoholics themselves. Sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. We're starting to talk a little bit about Al-Anon, like when the wives of or the husbands of somebody that's still drinking starts going to Al-Anon, even though their wife or husband or their alcoholic is not sober yet, right? If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions in your home. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband's bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. Hoping he called, and then when it rings, you're scared to death, right? We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. You can tell the alcoholic wrote that there, huh? In this time, when Bill and Bob and some of us early alcoholics were getting together in the homes, the wives would get together and talk about, oh, well, this one slipped. Oh, well, what do I do? And they were getting together and kind of forming their own little Al-Anon. Am I right? Jean? Yeah? When you have carefully explained to such people that he's a sick person, you have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were of weak character. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. Now, the kids are involved, right? The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it is best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. That terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. This has actually come up recently. What about if they want you to lie to their work? Have we ever had our family members just tell them I'm sick? Tell them I'm on the moon. Frequently you have felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick, when as a matter of fact he was tight or drunk. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he is doing. Discuss this with him when he is sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again. But be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did. There is another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You are thinking of the disgrace and the hard times which will befall you and the children. This experience may come to you, or you may already have it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. It may convince your husband he wants to stop drinking forever. And now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon to us, for it opened up a path which led us to the discovery of God. Kind of like they're saying a blessing in disguise, right? It led us to our own recovery, sometimes losing the job or getting an employer who cared enough about you getting well, right? We have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problems too. We wives found that, like everybody else, we were afflicted with pride, self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. Has anybody ever heard it's a family disease? Yeah. It doesn't just affect us. It affects everyone we touch, like dominoes, right? At first, some of us did not believe we needed help. I remember being a sober alcoholic, and somebody suggested that I go to Al-Anon because my husband was out there. And I was like, oh, for heaven's sakes. Now, on top of all of this, I have to go to Al-Anon too? And he gets to keep drinking? Oh, that's just not fair. We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer if our husbands stopped drinking. But it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God or our own spiritual help, right? Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. When we do that, we find it solves our problems too. The ensuing lack of fear, worry, and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. We urge you to try our program, for nothing will be so helpful to your husband as the radically changed attitude toward him which God will show you have now. Go along with your husband if you possibly can. Isn't it interesting too? Like I said, there's certain things in here that you can pull out as far as sponsorship and sponsee relationships too, right? It's always good to learn spiritual principles when the person you're learning them from is doing the same thing, is walking the talk, right? We urge you to try our program. We didn't have Al-Anon at the time. So when we went to the meetings, or they started to do the steps, or they started to do meditation and prayer, or they started to, we urge you to check it out. You can try. I mean, it's all in the chapters right ahead of this. So if they wanted to do this as well, even if they weren't the alcoholic, we urge them to. If you want to come along with your husbands, come along. That's kind of what we're saying there. If you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem of drink, you are, of course, going to be very happy. But all problems will not be solved at once. Duh. Seed has started to sprout in a new soil, but growth has only begun. In spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs. Many of the old problems will still be with you. This is as it should be. I know for me, I kind of figured once I got to AA and I came into my very first meeting that I was going to get this and I was just going to be brilliant at it. All better. I did not want to have to wait till I did my steps, wait till I did my, right? And sometimes I have those expectations on others. Gosh, they've been around for a while. They're still, right? And we got to remember the ice cube melts slowly for all of us. And that happens with families as well, building those family relationships back, right? The faith and sincerity of both you and your husband, you and your alcoholic, will be put to the test. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education, for thus you will be learning to live. You will make mistakes, but if you are earnest, they will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize on them. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. Anybody make mistakes when starting to do the steps and getting together with family? Yeah, we do. It's kind of like the whole idea of us getting this thing done. Some of the snags that you will encounter are irritation, hurt feelings and resentment. Your husband will sometimes be unreasonable and you will want to criticize. Again, I'm going to point out how many people have sponsored or have had people sponsor them that criticize them, or that are irritated at them, or that feel like they're not doing it just right, or make you feel like you're just not doing it right. That's not our job to do that. And we have to remember these things. So even in working with others, it says these things, but the extended version, when we're going through like our first 6 months, first year, we have to remember patience and tolerance, understanding. And some of these rules apply, not just to the family of or to the wives, but to those of us that are carrying a message as well. Well, we're talking about here too, that the alcoholic, let's say the alcoholic's starting to go and get sober, and he still does some stupid stuff. Or we do, right? And the family might still be irritated because they keep coming down to TLC on Thursday night and I want to watch our show together, and they hang out with those people down there, right? So there's going to be different things that we have these high expectations of our loved one that's newly sober, right? That's going to be still, these feelings don't heal in 1 week, 1 day, 1 meeting, right? So some of the snags that you're going to come across are going to be irritation, hurt feelings. How about the parent that goes like this? They've been going to AA for 2 months now and I've not got my amends. I know they have an amends thing going there. And every time they come over, they look at you like, so how are those AA meetings going? Mm-hmm, yeah. Right? And the new alcoholic is going, my sponsor won't let me make amends till I get to that step and I have to do it right. You know what I mean? So there can be some things and snags that we come across. Feelings and resentments, and your husband may be unreasonable and you'll want to criticize him and his program, right? Starting from a speck on the domestic high-rise, great thunderclouds of dispute may gather. These family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband or to your alcoholic. You don't want things blowing up at home right after they came back from a meeting or they're trying to do this thing, right? All right, so the question that was brought, now, I'm going to repeat what he said only because right now we're recording, okay? What was said was, what if husband and wife are both alcoholics, have been around a long time? Now this, I'm going to paraphrase or make up my own because I do that all the time. But you both get to AA, you both have two different sponsors that are telling you two different things, but you want to make sure that your sponsor's telling you to do this direction and your sponsor's telling you to do this direction, so why aren't you doing that? Oh, he's not doing that. And all of a sudden the two of you, and he's saying that one example was they were married quite many years, but 30 days into the program, both sober, could not stay together and got a divorce. Wow! Well, that would be one of the cases that this seems. So don't let the little things blow up. It's always good to work your own, right? These family dissensions are dangerous, especially to your husband. Often you must carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. Never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to an alcoholic. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband or your alcoholic whenever there's an honest difference of opinion. Here's a direction. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. Ooh. That's another one of those ones that I think applies to sponsor, sponsee. Well, they might disagree or have a suggestion or have an experience that they could suggest a little differently than what you're going through, but they might say, well, but is it their job to criticize you or do it in a resentful spirit if you choose to do something that they didn't suggest? Patty O would always say, God kind of does this thing, and it's really nice when a sponsor does the same thing. Like the GPS in your car. It doesn't like yell at you and go, you're so dumb, you just missed that turn. It just goes, reconfiguring. Why don't you take a left up here? And I go, I'm going to go straight. And it goes, reconfiguring. Okay. Would you like to know? Maybe make a U-turn now. Oh, okay, no, we'll just reconfigure again. Right? And God does the same thing. Just kind of go, okay. Because we're headstrong. Oh, it says that, but I'm going this way. Right? So be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. You and your husband will find that you can pick your battles, right? You can dispose of serious problems easier than you can the trivial ones. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile and say, "This is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. Let's talk about it later." No. No hand signals when saying that. All right. If your husband is trying to live on a spiritual basis, he will also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention. Your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. We know that. We know we owe people when we get sober a whole lot more than just I got a 30-day chip, right? He wants to make good. Yet you must not expect too much. His ways of thinking and doing things are habits of years. Direction, patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords. And are they not when we deal with each other in the rooms too, right? Patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are watchwords. Show them these things in yourself and they will be reflected back to you from him. It's a direction. Live and let live is the rule. It's up there, right? Yes, it is. Live and let live. I really love when I go into a meeting and somebody goes, "Why are those things up on the board? They're not part of the program. They're not in the book anywhere." And I'm like, "Have you read the book? That's why we have this little sign." Some of them are. Live and let live is the rule is in the book. If you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other. We women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. It is the most natural thing in the world, once his liquor problem is solved, to feel that he will now measure up to that cherished vision. The chances are he will not, for, like yourself, he is just beginning his development. Direction, be patient. Love didn't get him sober, right? Another feeling we are likely to entertain is one of resentment that love and loyalty could not cure our husbands of alcoholism. We did not like the thought that the contents of a book or the work of another alcoholic has accomplished in a few weeks that which we struggled for years. At such moments, we forget that alcoholism is an illness over which we could not possibly have had any power. Your husband will be the first to say it was your devotion and care which brought him to the point where he could have a spiritual experience. Without you, he would have gone to pieces long ago. A direction. When resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count the blessings. After all, your family is reunited. Alcohol is no longer a problem, and you and your husband are working together toward an undreamed of future. Anybody ever have family members that get jealous of you spending all the time with the people that are sober down here at the club? And we're still not around, right? Still another difficulty is that you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics down there at TLC. You've been starving for his companionship, yet he spends long hours helping other men and their families. You feel he should now be yours. The fact is that he should work with other people to maintain his own sobriety. Sometimes he will be so interested that he becomes really neglectful. Your house is filled with strangers. You may not like some of them. He gets stirred up about their troubles, but not all about yours. It will do little good if you point that out and urge more attention for yourself. It won't do a whole lot of good. We find a real mistake to dampen his enthusiasm for the alcoholic work. Can you just picture the person that we're bringing home? No, he's great. I'm getting him sober. And he's passed out in the bathroom. Nobody can get in there. And he's drunk and we're showering him. And right? Can you feed him? Bring him a sandwich. We should join in his efforts as much as you possibly can. We suggest that you direct some of your own thought to the wives of his new alcoholic friends. Remember, now we're starting to develop that Al-Anon thought. They need the counsel and love of a woman who's gone through what you've gone through, the fellowship of Al-Anon. It is probably true that you and your husband have been living too much alone, for drinking many isolates the wife of an alcoholic. Therefore, you probably need fresh interest and a great cause to live for as much as your husband. If you cooperate rather than complain, you will find that his excessive enthusiasm will tone down. Both of you will awaken to a new sense of responsibility for others. You, as well as your husband, ought to think of what you can put into life instead of how much you can take from it. Inevitably, your lives will be fuller for doing so. You will lose the old life and find a much better. So just like, where's mine, where's mine, where's mine? If the alcoholic's not doing that and he's trying to be of service and help others, if the husband or wife of the alcoholic is going, how can I be of service to help others that are dealing with this, another parent, another, family member, we'll all be better off. Perhaps your husband will make a fair start on the new basis. But just as things are going beautifully, how many people have had a new sponsee and all of a sudden things are going beautifully and then they come home drunk? Darn. If you are satisfied he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as has been true with many of our men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. Your husband will see at once that he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. A direction. You need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He'll know. Cheer him up and ask how you can still be more helpful. Sometimes we don't need to remind the person in the room how spiritually dysfunctional we are. We know. The slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. In a weak moment, he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. We never, never try to arrange a man's life so as to shield him from temptation, the slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted will be noticed. When you call ahead to the families and go, everybody hide the beer. We're coming over. Is all the beer hidden? We notice. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. This is important. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. God has either removed your husband or your alcoholic's liquor problem, or he has not. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then you and your husband can get right down to fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem, along with everything else, in God's hands. We realize that we have been giving you much direction and advice. We may have seemed to lecture. If that is so, we're sorry. For ourselves, we don't always care for people who lecture us. But what we have related is based upon experience, some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we're anxious that you understand and that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties. And it says at the bottom, and it's referencing to the bottom of the page, the Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups was formed about 13 years after this chapter was written. Though it is entirely separate from Alcoholics Anonymous, it uses the general principles of the AA program as a guide for husbands, wives, relatives, friends, and others close to the alcoholic. The foregoing pages, though addressed to only wives, indicates the problems such people may face. Alateen for teenage children of the alcoholic is part of Al-Anon. If there is an Al-Anon listing in your local telephone book, you may obtain further information on Al-Anon and Alateen families by writing to World Service Office at 1600 Corporate Way, Virginia Beach. Back up to the top. So to you out there who may soon be with us, we say good luck and God bless you. Yay!